Okay, we are live on YouTube and I have Zoom pulled up. We are off mute. Gigi's off mute. For our audience, we have Brandy Varnell and Vern Nelson. They are both on mute, but they can hear us. And I have the meeting packet ready to go. We are all set.
I'd like to call the meeting to order and thank everyone for attending this evening, those remote and those in person. Let the record reflect we have four of the five elected board members present, and we have one member that is on Zoom. Gigi is using that as the input to the meeting this evening. Go ahead and do the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Changes to the agenda. I'd like to turn the order around and bring the HOSA state competition to be our first item on the agenda. Keep the order, just move it up to first. We have no one signed up to speak publicly this evening, so we'll go right into, are there any other changes? Okay. Then we'll go right into the meeting and move to the approval of the out-of-state travel for the HOSA state competition. And Brandy, if you want to give her a mic.
So Brandy, I don't know, did you hear that update? So we'll have you present first. We had you second, but I will pull up your agenda page, and that is pulled up on the screen now with your packet, and you are free to unmute. And if you need help, I can help you. Okay. I have a ask. Okay, there we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for putting this on the agenda, taking the time to look at our complete travel packet. I did go through the out-of-state overnight travel procedure like with a fine-tooth comb after I last spoke with you. And so just a quick clarification, this is a national competition, not a state competition. So basically, everything you asked for at the last meeting, how we get there, who we're taking, it will be myself and the four championship students that won our state championship going on to take schools in a national competition. Flying into Burbank, the competition is being held at California State University Northridge. So we would be there, we're gonna leave on a Saturday morning and we would be returning on a Monday because the competition is all day on Sunday. The extra information that I learned was that we will not be seated in this bracket. We have to earn our way onto the bracket, which my girls are excited about. They immediately started studying again, getting ready for the competition. So we'll go there, do two preliminary rounds to find our place on the bracket. I don't know how many other schools will be there, but it's national, so I'm assuming a lot. We've never been. So this is going to be a new experience for them. I'm thrilled to have your support.
Thank you, Brandy. Any questions from the board? We did receive all of the information you gave us. Okay. That being the case, I'll ask for a motion to approve the HOSA state competition travel. I have a motion, as we learned at the last meeting. I don't need a second, so I have a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. And that was a unanimous motion carried. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing how that goes.
Yeah, you'll be the first ones to know.
Thank you, Brandy. I'll put you on mute.
Thank you.
Next up is the approval contract with the Change Academy Lake of the Ozarks. And you're here to help us with this?
Sure. Good evening, directors. Due to this is a student-related issue, I'm going to try and be as general as possible so that we don't identify the student. I want to give you a little bit of background, how we got here, and then I want to go over some procedures on how IDEA works, and then I think there were some questions that were given to you ahead of time. I'm trying to answer those questions as well. So in this situation, think it's good to understand how the LRE process works, which is called the least restrictive environment. General education is considered the least restrictive environment, so all students going to school, regardless of their abilities, are in the general education classroom. That's the least restrictive environment, or LRE 1. To move up into the levels of LRE, it depends on your level of.
Stop you for just a second, Paul. Gigi, are you able to hear Paul?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, go
I can't see you with the
ahead. I know,
TV.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, appreciate that.
I'm wondering if we can, because
I can move, yeah, I'm happy to move, so if that works.
No, well, that'd help. I don't know if we can.
I don't think we can turn that off.
Oh, okay.
The fish won't.
I'm getting
survive.
old, I'm sorry, if you can come
I have the
closer.
same, I have the same concern,
Okay,
for the same reason.
can you come closer?
You?
Yes.
Yeah, you
Well,
bet.
Step
That
in,
roll.
maybe pull up a chair.
All right. Look at that, I like that.
That podium
Although-
doesn't
We're
move?
going casual.
Okay, I almost feel like I'm getting interviewed now.
Now, can she still hear us?
Can you still hear him now? Might want to say something.
If he talks, maybe.
Hey Gigi, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
everyone can.
All right, perfect. So, like I was saying, LRE 1 is general ed, and then it moves up on LRE 2 and LRE 3 based upon what your needs are. So it's not by disability category, it comes down to what are your needs. And so LRE 2 is basically 39% to about 70%, and then 79 to 100% is LRE, or opposite way.
In the
So-
regular classroom.
Yeah, so opposite. 79 to 80% is in the general ed, is considered LRE 1. And then 39 to 79 is LRE 2. 0 to 39 is considered LRE 3, the most restrictive.
And is that the amount of time spent?
That's the
in
amount of
classroom?
time spent
Right,
in the
standard
different
classroom.
place. Yep. So students that are in the self-contained classroom are in that LRE 3. So they're 0 to 39% of the time they're in general ed classrooms. So in this particular case, the student has been in a number of those LRE categories. They started out in our school system in LRE 1, and as they moved through elementary school, it became more restrictive based upon the needs of the student. By the time the student got into middle school, the needs had reached the point where they were more in a LRE 2, getting resource support, but not spending as much time in the general ed environment as like peers. So then we got to a point where, due to disciplinary actions as well as impact other students in the classroom, the student could no longer be successful in that particular environment. So even with like the 0 to 39%, still was having an impact on the teacher, other students that they're working with, and was not having academic success. So that, at that point, the student was recommended by the IEP team to go to a off-campus, non-public agency.
When was this?
This was before COVID, 2019. So I think it was the 2019-20 school year, so before I got here. So the student was there through 2019, 20 school year, started 2020-21 school year, same place. At the end of 2021, not quite at the end, it was about January, child, which was the NPA, said, we can no longer serve this student. The rationale for serving the student, not being able to serve him, was due to behavior, not engaging and having impact on other students, and they had concerns around mental health issues. So at that point, our NPAs, or non-public agencies, are most restrictive in the state of Washington, because they are essentially, there are no general ed kids that are there. The services are very restrictive in terms of like 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. So very high adult to student ratio. So at that point, when the student's unsuccessful, we're down to the point of where do we go from here? Now, in Washington State, we do not have not a residential non-public agencies. We have two, but you technically have to be a ward of the state in order to get into them. Western State is one of them, and Eastern State's the other one. Clover Park School District manages the education services for Western State. But getting in there is, they have 8 beds and they go to wards of the state. So that's when I say it's difficult to get in, it's
So limited.
limit, and that's statewide, 8 statewide, so just to give you an idea. Also, so to help understand how the mental health piece works, and I think Dan has mentioned this before, but in Washington, a kid that is 13 years old can make mental health decisions. So they can decide to talk to a counselor, or they can decide not to talk to a counselor. So residential mental health agencies, the student doesn't have to go. They can say, I don't want to go, and nobody can force them to go. So that becomes challenging for students that have emotional or mental health issues, even though we might say they're not capable of making that decision, the law grants them the ability to make that decision. So just so you have some background on that.
That's really great.
So, what we have is a list of non-public agencies that are approved by OSPI, the Office of School Public Instruction. So those, in order to be approved, they have to submit an application to the Office of Public Instruction. There's review criteria that OSPI uses. Based upon that review, they can grant them approval for 1 to 3 years. So 3-year annual review is the best, because that means that they've met the criteria, they've been in the system for a number of years and continue to be meeting the criteria. Those that get a 2-year review, they've been in the system, but they haven't been as long, they haven't had as many approvals, but it's still pretty good. The ones that we get pretty nervous around are the ones that are kind of a conditional approval or only 1 year. So when I go through the NPA list, that's exactly what I'm looking for, is do they have an annual review of 2 or the annual review of 3? In this case, KALO is annual review of 2. In this particular place, I contacted a couple of different school districts in Washington that send students there. Lake Washington has several students currently at KALO, and they've used them for a number of years, and the recommendations came back very positive from Lake Washington. So we also include parents in looking at the different NPAs that are out there. In this case, the parents are very active and they're almost as busy as I am in terms of looking at it, so they reviewed a number. In order to move into that placement, even though, like I said, they were in a non-public agency that was a day school, we still have to have an IEP meeting to talk about a residential like placement. That was held prior to this particular student went to another state for services. In that placement, the student was unsuccessful due to a couple things. One is a change in different therapists, which triggered some different behavior. And then because of that triggering behavior and it escalated, that student was asked to leave. So that's why we're back here, based upon, like I said, I don't want to get into the whole disability of the student, but due to the nature, that's a big issue. So now we return the student to, in the district, we look for a one-on-one placement at a state NPA. It means they come out, they either come out and do one-on-one services in our school, one-on-one services in another location like the library, or in this case, we had an off-site agreement with a different agency that was willing to host, or go to the home. The parent in this situation said the student would not cooperate in a home environment, and we agreed that probably would be the best. And so, like I said, we settled for another agency where we have an MOU with. So, unsuccessful, student went at 10, escalating behavior in the community, a number of different things. So we're seeing not only the behavior that we saw prior to the student going in, we've seen an increase of that negative behavior again. So at this point, we're looking at moving to a more restrictive placement. It's residential. The IEP team believes that the mental health component plays a significant factor in the student's ability to succeed academically and socially. So that's kind of the, it's a long-winded history of it, but That's essentially where we are right now. We haven't made any agreements with Kayla. We did the research. We reached out. Just so that you're aware, in order for a student to move in, there's a lot of information we have to share with the agency. So we share, it's kind of like, I don't know how to give you an example, but we give them all the information, so we're trying to find out if it's the right fit. It's just not a matter of, hey, we want to send you here. It's here's all the information, because I'd rather know if this is the right fit, then it'll work for the student, they can be successful, and they're not trying to return the student back to us. They know everything that we know going into it. So in this case, we've shared everything, and the parents have shared everything, and Kalo is accepted, tentatively accepted, pending the contract. So now I'll see if I can answer some of your questions here.
You've answered about the first half of them.
Right.
No, and it gets down to what's the legal obligation in the situation, and you touched on that a little bit, on just
Yeah.
defining.
So essentially, I mean, the biggest legal obligation is the federal IDEA, so the Federal Individual with Disabilities Education Act. They've defined basically the 4 standards, and I talked about a couple of them as I was going through there. It's called the Rachel H. case. It was a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, and then reinforced a number of times by the Supreme Court. So essentially, what we look at is how can a student be successful in the classroom? What's the impact that student has on the teacher and others in the classroom? What's the impact of the student in the classroom in terms of making academic gains? So those are the components that we look at. And then what's the ultimate cost? So in other words, if we had a student in a general ed classroom, what would the cost be in order for that student to be successful? In this case, we can't get the student in a general ed classroom without, I don't know what we could do, because it just can't be effective. I gave you an example, the one-on-one wasn't successful. I can't imagine what we would try to do in a classroom with 30 kids. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background, and that's the, like I said, the Rachel H. case. Our WACs that lay it out, the WAC 392, 172A, 0260 is the whole WAC that identifies what the IP team's importance is of the decisions that they make, that type of thing. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background. So federally, we're required to do it, follow the law on it. A recent court decision came up. I just wanted to share this one because this is actually a huge ramification for special ed. This just came out this spring. So it's called decision is Perez versus Sturgis. This is a Supreme Court decision in which they decided that due process is no longer necessary for families to go through due process in order to sue the school district. And that's for IDEA and for 504. And just so people understand the due process, if parents believe that we did not provide a free appropriate public education, they have the right to go to due process and say that we didn't, and this is the reason we didn't. They no longer have to do that. They can go right to district court and sue us without having to go through the due process. That's a huge, huge decision. It didn't used to be that way. There's just a ton of decisions that say it goes back to the lower courts for an administrative law judge to follow the due process hearing. And now that's gone. So just wanted to give you the latest and greatest on that.
Okay.
So now whatever questions you have,
You touched on a little bit, but I just want to make sure. So if the board said, no, we're not going to pay this, what would happen?
well, we'd be in violation of IDEA at that point. And to be perfectly honest with you, our attorneys wouldn't take the case. We will lose in due process. They'll just say you're not willing to provide a free appropriate public education.
That's what I thought. But
Yeah.
I guess how many times do we try before they say, hey, it sounds like to me he needs help beyond being educated as far as in the school. Why can't we get him help so he can be educated instead of just trying to educate him, get him help so he can be educated? If we keep sticking him in an environment, hey, learn some math, learn some science, it's clearly not working. Where's that line where we say, hey, let's get this student help so he can learn? I mean, how,
Yeah, so this residential placement is, and I probably didn't explain this too well.
It's his school too.
Yeah, so this school is, there's therapy involved in this school. So the student goes to the school, there's individual therapy and group therapy. And the school focuses on behavior. So they include that as part of their education. So they'll go there, they'll actually have a therapy plan, mental health therapy plan. There's a psychiatrist on site, so if the student needs medication, they'll provide the medication for the student. So it's kind of all-in-one service there. And because it's a 24-hour-a-day facility, both in their residence as well as in therapy and in school, they're constantly working on social, emotional, and then the academics. But the social, emotional, and mental health component come first, and then the academics. Does that help a little bit?
yeah.
How much of that can they say no to?
They can't. So one of the things being an out-of-state, they don't have the same requirements as Washington does. So theirs is 18, it's in Missouri, but all our out-of-state placements are different than Washington. They don't have, almost everyone that I've looked into is 18. You have to be 18 in order to.
It wouldn't work if they didn't have that. That's why we
The
don't have any in
13th
this
thing
state.
is part of the
Right.
driver.
I mean, that's-
thing.
Yeah,
We have a law problem in this state, because it
Yeah.
really is not beneficial to, the federal government should sue Washington State for how that works.
right.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah. I think first of all, I'd like to say that this material, at least the issue as a packet, we received on email on 17 April. And this involves a contract. It involves issues that go, as Myron said, it goes far beyond education. And so we had very little time to really look at this. I called a couple of our legislators. Of course, they're finishing up in Olympia. And one is very angry right now about this whole situation. And the cost that we're incurring. I'd like to remind everybody that this reimbursement that we get is still the same tax dollars out of the same people that have to pay this for education. And when we spend these inordinate amounts of money on these kinds of cases, that comes out of the educational budget in total, which means that the students that are going to be productive and successful and hopefully well-educated citizens, that money is being drafted away from those people that are going to support me when I go and pick my retirement home, kind of thing. So I feel a little bit behind the 8 ball here because I haven't really been able to investigate some of this stuff. I can't sit here and take your word for it that it's the law, because the law changes with every judge that's in the courtroom, federal or otherwise. We know that. I think it's kind of interesting that in this agreement, and I just barely reviewed this, but the laws of Missouri are the ones that dictate here. Governing law, all the rights of the parties and all that stuff are Missouri law, or Arkansas law? Missouri. Which, I got to think about that a little bit, because this particular student has exhibited some behaviors that are pretty extreme, or could lead to other extreme things. If it happens here, Sultan School District, he's our kid. And we're at the top of that list for, whatever kind of legal action. If he goes to Missouri and does something particularly bad, what happens to us then? Because he's still our kid. And I'm not sure how that all plays out. The other thing that disturbs me is we've had this particular individual in an IEP of some sort since, is that elementary?
Mm-hmm.
Since grade 1. And
Not quite grade 1, but For elementary, right.
Early elementary, okay. And in the IEPs and all these programs there are goals that need to be met. And it's my understanding, although I'm not totally sure yet, but apparently these goals and points that are supposed to be made are not being made. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. I think
Okay.
that's when we look at if the goals aren't being made, we're required by law to adjust the
Well,
IEP.
again, I contest that particular statement at this point in time, because because in the end, I do not support this in the end, so I can say that up front right now, at least at this time. The contract, just that we're dealing with here tonight, has, I looked at the pay schedule here, and it's to be determined, and it's per request and as needed, and these things are $75, $100, $90 an hour. And I mean, if I just throw some numbers out there, I mean, I wind up with a staggering amount of money that could be spent, and we don't have any, I mean, just a few hours a week in each of these categories, which, from the sound of it, it sounds like it's gonna use a lot of hours, 2 or 3 a day or whatever, but if I just pick some random numbers, I mean, it's out to $1 million for 365 days, right?
Yeah, he said it for 365 days.
So, I mean, even if it's half that, that's $500,000 for 1 year. So, I would like a closer idea about what's it actually gonna cost us, because if we sign this contract, we don't know what it's gonna cost us.
Well, I
Or the
think,
state.
I sent you an example of that. I think the final contract from them gives us a better estimate of what it is. And it's about 188,000 for the year,
Well, the,
because he'll be getting residential therapy.
residential treatment is $471 a day.
Mhm.
The room and board is $100 a day, or 100, room and board is, yeah, $100 a day, times 365. So, I mean, I don't see how you can come up with that figure when you get this therapy, which apparently the student requires a lot, or I should say, is occupational therapy, I guess they're calling it. Is that?
No,
I'm not
it's,
quite sure what that is.
it'll be mental health therapy.
Well, that's not here in the schedule.
All right, occupational therapy is fine motor skills. So,
So he's gonna need psychiatry or psychiatrist or mental health stuff, which is not in the schedule here.
Isn't that under the residential treatment services?
it's residential treatment and then therapy.
Well,
So,
that's $171,000 right
yeah, so
there.
he doesn't need an occupational assessment, occupational therapy, speech, doesn't need that. He needs room and board, residential treatment, and academic tuition or academic aid.
So it's about 190,000. And that comes through with safety net dollars?
Yes, and so if the contract's approved tonight, we have a IEP skeleton model right now, and I'll be sending that to our attorney to make sure that we've listed the important components so that when we do submit for safety net, everything's been met.
So what is the possibility that he would actually make some of these goals, since he's never done this, never met the goals prior to this time?
Well, I think if you go to a residential facility, you completely control what is happening in that student's environment, right? So, yeah, when a student's not in our control, it's the same thing when they go to school. So we have them 6.5 hours a day, and we can make growth with them during the 6.5 hours a day. But when they leave school, we have no control over them. So depending on what happens, all the work that you've done in school could be retained by the student or might not be retained by the student. So in this case, you're controlling 24 hours a day of the expectations. You're working with the student on the skills that they need, and it's 24 hours a day you're working on it. You control completely everything that is happening.
Wasn't that happening in Utah?
It was happening in Utah, but like I said, there was a component where the therapist, in this case,
Getting
left.
into too many details.
Yeah, yes, things happen, and the the students' needs were impacted at that point, and recovering from that would have been difficult.
Does this issue about the fence and the toy thing bother you?
Let's be watching the details because we don't want to be able to
I'm
identify this.
just trying to be general.
I think anything that that the student exhibits both in school and out of school is relevant as you develop a plan.
And
Well-
we had a good report from Lake Washington School District.
Yes.
And they've had students that attained success
Yes,
at this.
yeah.
Can we pin down a cost closer that pins it down a little better?
Yeah, I mean, I can get back to them tomorrow and say, give me the exact, they're changing over their rates and they gave me both. So, you know, Dan and I can work the numbers so we have the exact.
So for example, the academic tuition per day, the TBD, students not doing school 365 days a year.
No, because they're off on the weekends, right, for academics.
Sure.
But they're still receiving support during that time. They will go out on field trips and work on the skills they've learned so that they can generalize those into different environments. So, and those would happen on the weekends.
Well, and one of the things that Ed said that I agree with is we're behind an 8 ball. And the problem doesn't lie in this boardroom, the problem lies in Olympia. And with some of these, because there are no in-state facilities like this, because a child that's struggling for whatever reason that needs to be in one of these can just not want to be with, if there's a mental health part of it, they don't make rational decisions that they might make if they weren't suffering from mental health. So I believe it's going to be in the, I did the math, taking out weekends and things, and I came up with somewhere around 175. So when I heard 180, it wasn't dramatically different. And as much as I don't like that,
Well,
because
this is 365 days. This is not taking out weekends.
I know, but you take out
The academics.
the academics and things. You don't take everything times 365. And because of that, as much as I don't like it, I think we need to make a motion and do it, because what we lose if we don't is a lawsuit that will cost our district money that isn't reimbursed by safety net, and even causes our students to have a greater deficit of educational money spent, which needs to be fixed in Olympia. That's where this really needs to be addressed. So,
So can I have some words in here?
sure.
I disagree from the standpoint that it's never going to be fixed in Olympia unless some school stands up and goes to a judge and says, is this really what the law says? And the judge says, yes, it does, and then we comply. We at least make the issue a political, legal, we don't take somebody's advice that does not practice that law, nor have we even asked a judge if that's what the judge is saying. It's hard for me to believe that the state can make a requirement for the school system and not provide a place for those requirements to be met within the state. In other words, the state's making a law which nobody in the state can comply with.
It's a federal law, and the state,
No.
it's a federal law that requires us to go to this level.
Well, now, wait a minute. You know,
Am I
well,
mistaken?
You're right,
It's a
IDEA
federal law.
requires
no,
that.
he's not right, because we have the 10th Amendment, which says, and all that stuff can be argued in court. And remember, the federal government makes no law, or except for certain stuff, and all the other belong to the states and the people thereof. That's the 10th Amendment. And that hasn't been asked in court in this particular case. Does the federal government actually have the power, the political power, to say that to the state? And I'm saying, maybe not.
Well, then we should get those legislators that agree with that
It's not
position.
the legislature, it's the
They-
court.
I know, but the legislators can address it at a higher level,
They
and
won't.
then it doesn't cost our students
That's
to
not a
test.
higher level, let the legislator.
Okay.
It's the 3 branches of government.
I'm not willing to support something that puts the educational dollars we have that, for our students, at risk for a lawsuit that likely we would lose, because case law so far has proven that every time this has been
I
tested.
don't know that I've reviewed case law. Have you,
Okay.
in this case?
I believe the gentleman in front of us who has an
Have you
education
reviewed
in
case
this.
law?
I have like I said, I have the case law that I just referenced
You
today.
just referenced one.
Yeah.
The case law.
20
you
minutes
have-
ago, we just
And you
referenced.
have the ability to.
The Rachel H. case is the one of the ones I reflected on, which is the 4 prongs that we talked about. around special education.
Well, I disagree because we cannot determine case or law without a judge at a court actually doing it. As far as lawsuits are concerned, if this particular individual engages in some activity in Missouri, I think we're far more vulnerable and far more in a dangerous spot than if he were here. And I just can't support this.
Okay. Any other questions?
Gigi wants to say something. Go ahead, sorry about that. Go ahead. Just don't forget, she wants to say something.
At what point does this not become our responsibility? We've clearly tried since elementary school. So I don't think there's anybody that can say, as a school district, we haven't tried with this student. And if at 13, he can say, I don't want this help, well, he's clearly past the age of 13, and if he says, I don't want this help, in Washington, how are we still liable for this?
Well, and I think that's a great point to bring up. I think by IDEA, the law that was referenced, we're required to educate a student with special needs that qualifies under that law to the age 21. And that's where we're still liable for it.
But you mentioned that there's a clause about cost versus successfulness in this case that you just mentioned. The student has to be,
Well,
there has to be a
it-
certain cost for
Yeah.
successful.
So that was reference to, it goes back to that Rachel H. case. What's the cost for that student to be in a general ed environment? So in this case, we're saying the student's unable to be successful in a general ed environment. No matter what we've done, we haven't been successful in placing that student in the environment. Even with a one-on-one, we've been unsuccessful. A one-on-one in a non-public agency away from general ed school, we've been unsuccessful. So it's, we're kind of at our last, going to your point, Byron, I just want to add one piece to it. I'm not sure if the student's unsuccessful in this program, I honestly can't answer what we do next. And I think it's, I don't have an answer for you. To be honest, this is 29, I've been in education 29 years. This is my first out-of-state residential placement. It just doesn't happen very often.
30 for me.
So yeah, so it's just unusual. I will ask that's one of my questions to Alyssa Fairbanks, is the attorney for OSPI that I've been working with, and I'm gonna ask Carlos, our attorney, what happens? I don't know.
But at that point, if there is no other school or an avenue, then the onus goes back, it has to go back on the federal government, because if the law requires to do it, then there isn't an environment. But right now, there is one that is reimbursed by
Right.
the state, and that's why I believe that our risk for not doing it is greater than our risk of him escaping or doing something horrible or horrendous in Missouri, although I believe there is a risk of some amount there. Gigi, you had some question or comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We need to approve this. We need to then, after we do that, take care of the student, and then we try to find out what do we do next. We don't just leave the student hanging. We also don't make our students political pawns to try to prove a point for something. This is what we believe we need to do, and we need to do it, and then we can go to Olympia, and we can talk to our legislators, we can talk to a judge. Whatever it is that you want to do, we can still do that, but this is our responsibility to the student, and we need to bite the bullet, take care of it, whether I agree with it or not. I think it's ridiculous, the amount of money that this is going to cost, but we're here to educate every single student, even the ones that are going to cost us money. And that's it.
Thanks, Eugene. I think, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I totally agree with what you say. That's exactly what I would say.
I want it to be clear that I don't think that the way the state is doing this puts things fair to school districts. So on many of the points, I agree with Ed, but on the point where we disagree is we should test it in the courts. I just don't want to put our school district into a...
So we should sue the federal government or the state of Washington as a school district because they're making us comply with
You
something
should
that
do
we
that with
feel
your
is
own
not-
money, Ed. but
We can
I'm
do
not
that with
willing
the
to,
district money.
I'm not willing to support that, and I don't know if the board is.
But that's not the question here.
All right. So, that being the case, if there are no further questions, I'll ask for a motion to approve the student placement at the Change Academy Lake of the Ozarks.
So moved.
I have a motion, all in favor, and I'll call it
Call
one
the
vote.
roll
So
call,
I will.
yeah.
Ed, how do you vote?
No.
Cindy, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes.
No.
Okay. And Gigi, how do you vote?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Next agenda, and thank you, Paul,
Thank you.
appreciate that. And I know this has been difficult for everyone. We're still friends, we just disagree on how this is going down. We have to pick a date for a budget retreat.
So I think trying to do it as early as we were was just too enough information. I think the legislature is closing in a week or so.
Do
I
we
don't
believe
know.
they'll finish on time?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. The House and Senate are still way far apart, so I just don't have a good feel for it. But
And-
ironically, one of the topics we're discussing tonight is one of the big ones in the budget that they're talking about, and this specific issue. I didn't even, not to rehash all this, think about this much until I had heard some districts that have these students, but this is one of the issues. So picking some dates in May, whether it's a Sunday afternoon or other dates, and 2 or 3 or 4, we can send out a doodle poll and see what works. We should be able to have more information by that
We
time.
can do a doodle poll, or can everybody bring their calendar at our next
It's Monday
board
night,
meeting Monday
yeah, we can do it Monday night.
That way we can make a decision on Monday night instead of this doodle poll that it works, but it's easier if we just all have our calendars here. We get bring your calendar. Monday?
Calendar, I don't even buy green bananas.
Well, you know what I mean, at least you'll know
No,
later.
I,
All right, that being the case, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Tough stuff, guys.
Okay, let me, hold on, just give me 1 sec to log off of everything and make sure we are